So I'm delighted to see this turnout. It's a specialist elite audience here, quite clearly. As the regulator, we don't necessarily expect to be popular, but we do hope to provide for you this afternoon an interesting, useful and an informative session in which we hope you will engage. We hope that we ourselves will demonstrate transparency and that you will provide us with feedback, because this session centres on an important consultation that's out right now, and that will affect everyone at the bar one way or another, and indeed across the legal profession, because all of the other regulators are consulting on similar topics at the same time. The BSB is required to bring the bar into line with recommendations from a recent Competition and Markets Authority report on legal services, but how we do that is currently entirely up to us. So it's very important that we hear from the profession, and the BSB has got a really open mind on how we should be taking forward those recommendations. The way the session's going to run is we'll have 3 short presentations, and then we'll open the floor to a question and answer session, a discussion, I hope. And I'm going to introduce the speakers now in the order in which they will present to us, and then hopefully it will flow quite naturally as between them. So that's me. Our first speaker, I can put the slide up already, is Ewan MacLeod, who's the Director of Strategy and Policy at the BSB. Ewan leads the team at the BSB that formulates our regulatory policy and then translates it into rules and guidance in the BSB handbook. He's a law graduate and he's got an MBA, and he worked with a number of public and regulatory bodies before joining the BSB in 2011. Ewan is going to talk about the consultation, give you a short presentation of it, and about the CMA report on the legal services sector as a whole that has led to our current consultation. We're then going to hear from Fiona Fitzgerald, the Chief Executive of Radcliffe Chambers and committee member of the LPMA. Fiona leads the team at Radcliffe. It's a commercial and chancery set with over 50 barristers and some 14 staff. Chambers Directory currently says of Radcliffe that they are, and I quote, at the forefront of a minor revolution at the bar that has seen the profession take on some of the trappings of modern customer-focused businesses. So who better than Fiona to talk to us about the aspects of client service that are at the heart of this consultation. And finally, we'll hear from a joint head of chambers, Naomi Ellenbergen QC, who's one of 11 silks at Littleton Chambers, which is an employment and commercial set in London with over 50 members. Naomi's chambers has an excellent record in client care, and she will talk about their experiences. I should of course add that Naomi is a Deputy High Court Judge, a Recorder of the Crown Court, and the Vice Chair of the Bar Standards Board. So without further ado, I will hand over to our first speaker, Ewan MacLeod. Thank you, Ewan. If I step back, then you won't fall over each other as we go. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Vanessa. I just wanted to start with a brief summary of the CMA report and what it recommended. I think the key headline from that was they found that competition in legal services was not working well, either for individual consumers or for small businesses. In particular, they found that there wasn't enough information available to help people to shop around and make the right choice of provider. And that was in terms of information about price, information about different quality that might be out there, and also the services that were on offer. They found that there was a wide variation in cost for similar services, which can sometimes be an indicator that there's not adequate competition in a market. And as I say, they found it was very difficult for consumers to shop around and find the best value provider for them. So that led them to make a number of recommendations. They recommended there should be a requirement for providers to display information on price, service, redress, and regulatory status in order to help potential clients find the right provider. They recommended revamping the Legal Choices website, which is something that we do jointly with the other legal regulators, to be a starting point for consumers who needed legal help with a problem. They recommended facilitating the development of intermediary and comparison tools to promote things like comparison websites for consumers. And they recommended encouraging providers to engage with client feedback and review platforms, again, as a way of helping clients or potential clients to reach a decision. They also made some recommendations, not so much directed at the regulators, but towards the government about reviewing the longer-term approach to regulation in the sector. But they did note that the current structures were not a major barrier to competition. So that's just a very quick run-through. Our focus today, or my focus, is going to be primarily on the transparency recommendations and the consultation that we've issued, which you may already have seen. I would start by saying this consultation is going to be the first of two. So as Vanessa said, we are still very open-minded, and we're really keen to get the views from as many different parts of the profession as we can, so that we can craft our firmer proposals in the next consultation in a way that will work for the profession and its clients. The consultation is open until the 5th of January, but as I say, there will be a subsequent one later on, and we have a number of roadshows that are being planned whilst the consultation is out, which I think Vanessa might tell us about towards the end. So focusing on the transparency requirements in particular, the key aim of the CMA is to help consumers compare different providers. And it's important to say here, we're not suggesting that barristers lack transparency once they're instructed. And we have quite clear rules about the information that has to be given to clients once they're instructed. But there does appear, if you look at the evidence that the CMA produced, to be an information gap for people who are trying to find and compare providers before they get to that stage. There's not much information available on price if you look at Chambers' websites, for example. We did some research which showed that the vast majority, something like 75%, I think, of the websites we looked at had no information at all online about fees. So from a consumer perspective, the only option then is to contact Chambers to ask for quotes. And yes, Chambers will be helpful when consumers do that, but it's not necessarily a very effective way of comparing a number of different providers. We obviously need to take into account the fact that most instructions to the bar come from solicitors. So we would expect them to be better informed, but we still want to make sure that their clients can get the best deal, and I'll come back to that later on in the presentation. So just a quick word about how the recommendations are going to be implemented. We've been working collaboratively with the other regulators on an implementation group. We've all published individual action plans in response to the CMA report. And we agree that there are benefits in taking a broadly consistent approach. And obviously that's in the interest of consumers who might be looking at different providers at the same time. But as the regulator of the bar, we need to make sure that what we're doing is the right thing for the bar and for barristers' clients. We also want to make sure that we're not imposing unnecessary regulatory burdens. So proportionality is key for us in all of this. So on the point of proportionality, thinking about the approach that the BSB is taking, what we've done is we've reviewed all of the recommendations in the CMA report and we've prioritized them. So we're only proposing that what we've called very high impact recommendations should be mandatory. So these are the things that we think will bring the greatest benefits to clients of barristers. We're also proposing to produce supplementary guidance which would cover some of the other recommendations that the CMA have made, but they won't necessarily be binding on the bar. So a quick run through of the actual recommendations that came out of the report and the ones that we're prioritizing. So in relation to price, we're proposing that the key disclosures would be around the charging model being used by a Chambers, an entity, or a sole practitioner. We're not proposing to mandate a particular method of charging, but we think it's important to be transparent about the model that's being used. We also think that additional indicative information should be produced that will help potential clients to understand the likely cost. So if hourly rates are being used, give indicative rates and how they might vary. So for example, will they vary depending on the type of case, area of law, seniority of practitioner? Where fixed fees are used, indicate what they might look like and the factors that might affect the total cost. It's still perfectly acceptable, of course, to have different rates for different types of work. We're not saying that people have to be bound by a single hourly rate or fixed fee for everything that they do. And of course, it will always be possible to offer deals or special offers to specific clients on a case-by-case basis. So just a quick summary on that. We're not proposing a one-size-fits-all model. We don't think that would work, and the range of work undertaken at the bar is too broad for that to ever work. Barristers will still be able to charge different prices for different areas of work. Fees only need to be estimates. That's something we've been quite clear about in the consultation. We know it might not be possible to give precise quotes on a website, for example, but it should be possible, hopefully, to give a range. But we think that clarity on how fees are arrived at and how they might vary will be a key component of this. Moving on to service, we think that the key information here will be a description of the services that are provided and also potentially indicative timescales and how they might vary so that the client has an idea of how the case might progress. Now, we've given a relatively straightforward example here in relation to mediation as an example of how you might indicate what the timescales are. We recognize that this will be much more complicated potentially for other types of work. And one of the things we're keen to do is talk to people from different practice areas so that we can give sensible examples across different areas of work that will ultimately help people to comply. In relation to redress, we're also considering making standard statements compulsory about the fact that barristers are regulated by the BSB and what the arrangements are in relation to making complaints and also going to the legal ombudsman. A few additional proposals that we're considering. We're looking at first-tier complaints data and whether the publication of that might be helpful for clients. Now, obviously, we recognize there's a risk that that kind of data could be confusing or misleading for clients, but might there be a standard way of reporting across the profession that could prove useful for clients? That's one of the things we're consulting on. Also, use of the BSB logo is something we flagged. Would it be helpful for clients to see at a glance evidence of who the regulator is to help them understand the protections that might be there for them? And in relation to public access, would it be helpful to require the BSB's guidance for lay clients to be provided to every client? So those are our proposals. An important element of this, which I touched on earlier, was who will need to comply. Primarily, we're focusing the consultation on the self-employed bar and BSB entities. People in employed practice may well be covered by the arrangements of another regulator if they're working in a regulated firm. We think these recommendations are less relevant to employed barristers in in-house practice. But we're trying to, as I said earlier, prioritize what we think will make the biggest difference for clients of the bar. The CMA has given particular priority to public access barristers. Now, that feels right because of the direct interface that they have with clients. But the CMA also noted that there could be benefits of greater transparency in the referral sector. So we're asking about that in the consultation too. Our priority for referral clients would be the more vulnerable or less knowledgeable clients. So we're proposing to link any proposals to people who are currently entitled to complain to the legal ombudsman. Obviously, we recognize that that would probably capture almost everyone practicing at the bar. so the impact is potentially significant. But we're particularly interested to hear people's views on that, and also the views of solicitors about whether it would help them to serve their clients better if there was greater transparency there. So that brings me on to how we expect people to comply with the new rules. We've broadly identified two different approaches in the consultation. One would be to take as an example, a set of chambers. One would be to publish pricing information about each individual barrister within the chambers. Another might be to publish aggregate information at chambers or entity level about the range of barristers and range of services that were provided. I think that the important thing is for us not to be too prescriptive. As I said before, we're not going for a one-size-fits-all approach. But in either case, our thinking at the moment is people could choose either. We wouldn't be mandating one across the board. We think you might want to publish the most common types of case and how that tends to be priced depending on a number of different factors. So you could give a range of prices depending on the level of seniority of the practitioner, for example. So we're particularly keen to hear from people about the practicalities of that, and again, how we might be able to help you to comply once we get to actually drafting the new rules. That's all I wanted to say by way of introduction, but that finishing there on compliance and implementation is probably a good moment to pass over to Fiona, who can give us her perspective on some of the practicalities of this.
Thank you. You've been keeping busy. And thanks very much, Vanessa. I've got to say, it's probably the first time I've ever heard the words minor revolution and chancery bar in the same sentence.
There you go. That's why I picked it up.
We'll take it where we can. So I'm here with two hats on, really. I'm the CEO of a Chambers, but I'm also on the Legal Practice Managers Association. And we are a group of professional managers who are, I suppose, becoming more and more relevant at the bar. And so this is particularly relevant to us today. So I just wanted to kind of put a few things in context, and that is some complaints data. The legal ombudsman share their complaints data on a regular basis. And I just thought it might be quite helpful because it was something I was interested in as to where complaints arise. And actually, if you look down where the most complaints are, you'll see it's mainly in criminal and family. And actually, it makes sense if you think about it, because they're high emotional areas of practice. But if you look further at the types of complaints, you'll actually see further down the issues around costs are there at 14% over the last year. And communication is down at 10%. And the real issues around complaints are actually failure to follow instructions and failure to advise. So turning to the transparency standards and what those issues are, we've got